Welcome to Legal Wellbeing in Action, the podcast series of the New Mexico Wellbeing Committee. This year, we will be focusing on the new campaign called What a Healthy Legal Community Looks Like. Last year, we focused on you, our listeners, as the individual, but this year's Wellbeing campaign is looking to understand the state of well-being in legal organizations, enlist leaders to help define what well-being looks like for their populace, and the New Mexico Wellbeing Committee would love to hear from you in your area of the legal community. What health and well-being initiatives are in place where you work? What ideas do you and or your colleagues have for improvement? What practice, resource, or service is in place where you work that you're particularly proud of? For our episode today, we will be featuring the Senior Lawyers Division. Welcome Annette DeBois, Jocelyn Torres, and Peter Chestnut. I'm excited to have you three with us today to discuss what well-being looks like for the experienced lawyer. From here, I'll let our guests take it away. And as always, thank you to our listeners for tuning in. If you'd like to give some feedback or continue this discussion on well-being for senior lawyers, please email us at well@sbnm.org. We hope you enjoy.
Thank you, Tanessa, for the introduction, and thank you for having us on Legal Wellbeing in Action. Today's episode is about issues relating to the well-being of senior lawyers in particular. My name is Annette DeBois. I graduated from the UNM School of Law in 1982 and immediately joined a small private firm, Paskind Lynch and Dow, where I stayed for 18 years. I then became the staff attorney for the Chapter 13 Bankruptcy Trustee, and my last 5 years of practice were as an administrative hearing officer for New Mexico Taxation and Revenue Department. After retiring in 2013, I discovered the joys of free time and take advantage of that by traveling, doing volunteer work, and enjoying the beautiful New Mexico outdoors. When I retired in 2013, I was unsure what lay ahead for me, but definitely decided to never go on another board. Then Terry Revo convinced, or shall I say coerced me, to join the board of the Senior Lawyers Division of the State Bar of New Mexico. And boy, am I glad he did. Members of the bar who are 55 years of age or older and have practiced law for at least 25 years are automatically members, and there's a provision for applying for earlier membership if you wish. This board is one of the most active and functioning boards I have ever seen and takes advantage of the experience and expertise of its members. The division has many projects and activities aimed at addressing issues of the bar in general, and specifically those related to senior lawyers. But our signature event is the award of annual scholarships to third-year law students to aid in their transition from student to lawyer, and to provide some financial support during the weeks leading up to the bar exam. The awards are based on essays on a specific topic and are presented at an annual memorial event each November, where we honor and recognize those lawyers who have passed away during the previous year. The podcast today focuses on the well-being of lawyers who are older, more experienced, and or approaching retirement. Hopefully, the issues and potential solutions we discuss will resonate with lawyers who have been in practice for 2 years, 22 years, or 52 years. So let's get started. I am pleased today to have with me for this podcast Jocelyn Torres, the chair-elect of the Senior Lawyers Division, and Peter Chestnut, the immediate past chair. To begin, I'd like to ask them to briefly introduce themselves to you. Jocelyn?
Hi, I'm Jocelyn Torres. I'm from New Mexico. I've been an attorney for 40 years. I retired as a trial attorney with state government, actually with CYFD 5 years ago. I'm not really retired because I'm on the Senior Lawyers Board. I'm on the Public Law Division. I'm on another committee, the WellBeing Committee. And also I work for the city of Albuquerque and for the legislature as a contract attorney. So I think I don't understand the definition of retirement, but that's me. Thanks.
Peter?
Hello, everyone. I'm Peter Chestnut. I moved to New Mexico after college to work with Pueblo Indians, and through that got interested in the law and graduated from UNM Law School back in 1975. For most of my career, I started out as a sole practitioner, hanging out my shingles, wanting to experience the economic winds of the time. And since the early 1980s, I've worked as a lawyer for a number of the pueblos in New Mexico, and my practice emphasizes Indian affairs and water law. And I'm honored and privileged to have represented two pueblos for over 40 years now. Working less as the years go by, and fortunately, my practice has grown to be a small firm. I'm now the minority owner of the firm that has my name on it, and my partners are very gracious about encourage me to work as little as I'd like, and are glad when I help out. So I'm still doing work for in a couple of matters, but part of what I pivoted to as I'm doing less billable hours is volunteer work, and Senior Lawyers Division is part of that. So I will stop there for now and get on with the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you both. And why don't we start the conversation today by focusing on the limitations, in particular physical limitations, that lawyers might face. So as they get older, lawyers might come to realize they have physical or other limitations that affect their practice, but they still want to continue working. What suggestions or ideas can you offer to those lawyers who aren't ready to pack it in yet, but might have things like inability to drive that would impact the kind of practice they have? Jocelyn?
I think this question really hits home for me because obviously I'm still working and I'm still volunteering with the state bar, but being a trial attorney is so intense, and it became very difficult. And it wasn't really physically, but I felt like it was emotionally very taxing. And so I really, by the time I had planned to retire, I really was seeking out a different type of work. Now we have Zoom. So even if there are physical limitations as far as driving or other physical limitations, we can always participate by Zoom. Most meetings that I facilitate or meetings that I go to nowadays are hybrid, so they have a portion by Zoom and a portion in person. So I think we have more flexibility now than we did in the past, especially after the COVID. We're using the internet types of meetings and discussions quite a bit.
This is Peter. I've been very fortunate and blessed with good health, but as the years go by, I find that sleeping more is an important thing. And as I said before, I'm still doing some practice, though at a reduced level, and doing more walking. At this point, I try to spend an hour a day outside and walking or exercising, and they can be the same hour. And I find that leaving more space between activities works better for me as well. As you were mentioning about lawyers who might not feel comfortable driving, I'm reminded of water rights negotiation I was involved in probably, decades back. But an older lawyer at the time, we had to drive an hour and a half to meet. This was in the pre-Zoom era with the other parties. And he said, can I ride with you? And I said, sure. And we ended up having great conversations as we drove together. And so I found that, the bar can be quite collegial in my experience. And so if people know what your limits are, they're very quite willing to see what they can do to adapt to that. And as Jocelyn mentioned, Zoom has really been a game changer. So those meetings that I used to have to drive an hour and a half to get to, I can now just click on Zoom and join. And that's been a good change. But I think that letting people know if you have limits. And in another story I'll just mention in this regard, that I recently was involved in an activity with a senior lawyer who had trembles, and he just said, when we're together, would there be a table so I can just put my arms on it and then I'll be fine. So again, I think letting people know what you need in order to function the way you want to is a key piece of continuing to practice or to interact with senior lawyers, as the years go by.
I'm reminded your comment about driving with the other lawyer and the collegiality of the bar. That certainly is a notion that applies to well-being for lawyers of any age. When I was in practice, I represented a mortgage company, and we did a lot of foreclosure work. And I hired an attorney on behalf of my client to be the special master. And it was David Grammer Sr., and I don't know if any of you remember him, but really an old school, a handshake was all you ever needed from him, and you had a deal. And we would drive all over to Gallup or Farmington or Santa Rosa, wherever we had to hold these foreclosure auctions, basically. And I can remember how wonderful that time was, an opportunity for me to learn from him, for him to relate to a younger attorney. I hope that as a bar, we're well on the way to getting back to that kind of interaction among us. Keep your fingers crossed, right? I'd like a comment from each of you about the notion of the need for shorter hours. You come from two very different kinds of practices. Peter, can you start by talking about what your options are in a firm for cutting back your hours, and then maybe Jocelyn can weigh in on that as well.
Sure. Yeah, within my firm, it's really been very, very supportive. That I've made clear for the past several years that I don't want to be the lead lawyer on any matter that comes in. And so our youngest lawyer is from one of the pueblos, and well, he's not the youngest, but younger. And so I've really been working with him on a water rights settlement negotiation for the past several years. And it's been great to see him blossom. The senior lawyer in the firm and I have been together for probably 30 years or more. And she's very supportive and keeps telling the younger lawyers, it's like, watch what he's doing because I'm going to be there soon and you guys are going to have to carry it on. So I've really enjoyed kind of pivoting to being the person who's kind of counsel. Our title is attorneys and counselor at law, and I feel like the counseling piece is sometimes underemphasized. But I've really enjoyed being able to share my thoughts and have them write it down and take it someplace else. I will say in terms of practicing less than full time that a key element is financial stability. And, I've been fortunate that, in the private practice, you don't have a pension. And so you've got to try to, put money into individual retirement accounts and hope that your investments do well. And I know my first efforts in that regard, I learned the difference between a return on investment and a return of investment. That it was sold to me as you can make 17% a year for the first 3 years. And then 7 years later, it's like, well, they're out of money and we can get you 95% of what you put in back. And it's like, oh, okay. So nobody's born knowing this stuff, but paying attention to the financial side in earlier years can make a big difference in terms of the flexibility that you have in later years.
Jocelyn?
Okay, so I do have a pension from state government. It's not the full retirement pension, but it's a good pension. What I like about being retired, I might not work less hours, but the hours I do work are less stressful because I have the flexibility to do the kind of work I want to do, especially now with Zoom. So with the City of Albuquerque, I facilitate the neighborhood association meetings. Those are either in person or by Zoom. And then I write the reports on those meetings. And I enjoy writing. I enjoy that kind of work. I don't find it stressful. Even if it's a stressful meeting, it's nothing like going through a trial. So, my worst day with a meeting is probably better than the best day with a trial. So as far as stress is concerned, I like that. I do tend to work quite a few hours because the work that I do is demanding. And then when I'm with the legislature, when they're in session, this time it was easier via Zoom because I could work from home sometimes and I didn't have to do as much traveling. But either at the beginning or the end of the session, it can get pretty intense because I analyze the bills that may or may not get passed. So the pension part, I think that takes planning. My dad kept telling me, work for the state, work for government. And I thought, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. So I went into private practice. And then when my daughter was 6 years old, I thought, maybe I need more security and more stability than private practice. And so that's when I went back to state government and I was able to retire. I think that's a great plan for younger attorneys as well to start thinking, like Peter said, either start thinking, how do you plan to invest your money, or start thinking about going into government work. It doesn't pay as much usually as private practice, but boy, it's wonderful once you get rid of those golden handcuffs. It's a good life.
So I'd like to address something that's not specifically directed at senior lawyers, but how this might impact everybody out there. Jocelyn, you made a comment that you're working the same hours, but they're less stressful. That is probably, I would suggest, a goal that every lawyer should have, because it's really difficult to spend 20, 30, 40 years of your life doing something that increases your stress level, perhaps to a point that you can't handle. Can you think of any advice that you might give younger lawyers who are starting out that would help them make those decisions early on? And in particular, I'm thinking about attorneys who might start with a firm, especially a big firm, where the pressures, the billing pressures and the advancement pressures are so intense. And of course, that advice would also apply to people who might be looking to cut back working towards retirement. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, a friend of mine, actually, I have some good advice that was given to me right when I retired. A friend of mine that was quite a bit older than I am at the time. I said, well, then I have to do this and I have to do that. And I was thinking more of the kind of work that I had done for the state. Maybe not necessarily a trial attorney, but I was thinking of things that would have been a whole lot more stressful than what I'm doing now. And my friend said, Jocelyn, what do you want to do? And I said, well, what do you mean? What do I want to do? I mean, what kind of a question is that? I had never thought about that question ever that I can think of. And then I started thinking, well, what would I want to do? What am I good at? I'm good at mediation. I'm good at getting along with people. I'm good at chairing meetings. I'm good at building people up instead of knocking them down. So basically, the work that I do for the city involves those skills, and I love it. Okay, so then the legislative work, same thing. I've always admired the legislature. I've written 2 statutes that got passed, and I thought, I love writing. I love the legislature. I know the legislature. Why don't I apply? And I got that job too. So that, in my world, is a lot less stressful. And it's not something I worry about. It's something I look forward to, actually. So that's my advice.
Well, and it sounds like the message that we could all learn from is find what you love to do and what you enjoy doing and let the rest fall into place. I can remember when I had been with my firm for almost 18 years, and I was just ready for a change, ready to get away from the stresses of private practice. And people went like, how can you do that? You've been building this up for 18 years. How can you just walk away from it? And my response at the time was, I just wrote my last tuition check for my youngest child. And that's what I did. So that's a good message for all of us. Peter, anything you wanted to add to that idea?
Yes, I agree that one of the approaches that Jocelyn mentioned about looking for less stressful activities is something that I've become more mindful of in later years, and to the bar's credit, there's a lot more emphasis now on mindfulness. Which is a wonderful practice of, being in the moment and not, getting caught up in the past or the future. I want to share something that's a quote attributed to Eleanor Roosevelt, which is, the past is history and the future is a mystery and today is a gift. And that's why we call it the present. And, if we can think about that and really make the most of each day. I also want to emphasize the value of family in facets of life outside of practice, that I decided early on that I was not going to bill the number of hours that the big firms did, and they might work 80 hours a week and I'd work 40. I wanted my 40 to be as good as any of my hours, as good as any of their hours, but I wasn't going to put that much of my life into my practice. And so I made a real effort to have dinner at home basically every night. And I remember our daughter really thanking us for that, because she said so many of her friends didn't have that experience, and their families were not as strong for them as we were for her. So, and it goes both ways. I mean, you draw strength from your family. And I know as when my daughter was very young, I'd come off a day of work and, it's like, oh, I'm tired, I'm frazzled, I'm wound up. And I'd have to take a deep breath at the front door and realize they don't care about that. They want attention from me now. And as much effort as it took to do that, it was always rewarding. And so I really encourage the, family and diversity of interests, that I try to keep a thread of music going. I started playing guitar when I entered law school as a kind of a balance to the intellectual intensity of the school. and I tried to keep a thread of that going, and with a goal of, as I worked less, I could play more music. And I'm now at that time, and I'm engaging with music in a more intense way than I have in the past. So, and that's part of what part-time work allows you to do.
Thank you, Peter. That's a great message and a great segue into another topic I wanted to address, which is that of identity. We are educated and nurtured to put the interests of our clients first. Nobody wants a surgeon who's not having his best day on the day of your operation. And nobody wants a lawyer who's not in the mood the day of trial. And so we are encouraged and expected to do our very best for our clients every single time we represent them, no matter what context it is. It's no wonder that your identity as a person is wrapped up in your identity as a lawyer. And that's for the good of the people you serve. But sometimes that can create issues for you personally. So what do you say to a lawyer who gets to a certain point in his or her career, whether it's thinking about retirement, whether it's mid-career, and that lawyer really has no other identity, and all of a sudden, perhaps, as you age, it's, well, now what? How can I possibly have a life after law practice? What advice could you offer that person? And does any of that apply to the day you graduate law school and start working? Jocelyn, you want to take a stab at that one?
Yeah, I'm really grateful to be an attorney. It's been a career that I have really, really enjoyed. Even through the ups and downs, it has been the best career for me. So when I started working for the city, for example, there are other people that are not attorneys. They're just meeting facilitators. Some of them are mediators, some are both. And they told me, well, don't be signing off with your title attorney at law, or don't even include attorney, just say mediator and facilitator. And I did that a couple of times, and that felt like so awkward to me because I thought, I am an attorney. I'm thankful to be an attorney. I use those skills very well, mostly, almost always to help other people as well. So why not put in there that I'm an attorney? So I guess what my advice would be is you can do other types of work. You can be a planning meeting facilitator. You can be a mediator. You can be a legislative analyst if you want to. However, you can still be an attorney and be very thankful and grateful for that. So that would be my advice is be who you are and don't put yourself down because you're an attorney, and don't let others put you down because you're an attorney, because it's something to be very proud of and very grateful for. That's what I think.
Well, I too am grateful for my career as a lawyer, that it's been an opportunity to work with some amazing people and to be involved in matters that I've been glad to be part of. I do think that it's a challenge. Jocelyn earlier said, what do you really want to do? And I think that for a number of lawyers, their identity is tied up in being a lawyer. And I know for myself, as I'm thinking, well, I'm wanting to retire. Well, what will I do? And you realize how much of energy you get from practicing. That, very few people come to see a lawyer because things are going well, right? That's like, I need your help on something. I want to make something happen, or I need to stop something from happening. And so, I think the ability to engage at a human level with the people you're working with is vital. But I do think that the challenge of staying yourself and feeling like you're the human being you want to be is pretty important. Another phrase I like to share is that I think of lawyers as helping to weave the fabric of society. And many times I say, so how is my energy helping to make the society evolve in the way that I'd like it to be for my, as a Pueblo leader said, for the grandkids of my grandkids. That, I think that helps, because I think you can get caught up in doing the work. And I agree with Annette, everybody wants their best every day, but I've observed that sometimes your best is none too good. And you're talking about the surgeon. Do you want to be the person who's getting operated on the 36th hour of that surgeon's shift? No. And so dialing back the time to where the time you put in is good time, because I've found myself in, not in recent years, but in earlier times, working way into the evening, and then the next day it's like, well, how much did I really get done then? I thought I was working on it, but when I looked at it, it didn't look as good as I thought it did. And sometimes you have no choice, right? If you're preparing for something the next day, if you're in the midst of a trial, you've got to work it. But I really try to, keep nights and evenings and weekends, outside my practice, as a way of trying to keep the humanity part of myself as well energized, the fire inside stoked, as well as the practice. And I would suggest that's something that is worthwhile, that people can think of right out of law school, because the tools you get in law school are very powerful ones and very valuable, regardless of what you do. And a number of people who went to law school don't end up practicing as lawyers, but they use those tools in a variety of ways. And so I think being open to that possibility. Not everyone likes private practice. There's a lot of uncertainty there, certainly as a small firm. And so, listening to yourself, which is not always easy, but trying to keep in touch that way is I think very important.
Yeah. You made a couple of very interesting points when you talked about how you go to law school, you're still a lawyer, and even if you never practice law, those tools and things that you learned about how to address a problem, how to deal with an issue, are so applicable to so many other areas of life. I've always felt that everybody could benefit from a law school education, whether or not they ever wanted to actually be a lawyer. I'd like to focus just for a couple of minutes on what you've both talked about, but applying it a little more to the lawyer who is starting to think about retirement, maybe 5 years out, 4 years out, 2 years out. And like you said, Peter, well, what will I do when I wake up tomorrow when yesterday was my last day at work? I know for me personally, I was fortunate enough to work always in situations that did not require 80-hour work weeks, and that was by design and on purpose. So when I retired, I already had some interests, hiking, the outdoors, and then I developed new interests when I had the time, like music, learning a new musical instrument. Do you have any specific practical advice for lawyers who find themselves in that sort of 5-year period where I want to cut back, working towards retirement, but oh my gosh, I'm terrified to think about that day after my last day at work? Jocelyn, thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's helpful. It was helpful for me to start changing my way of thinking. I went to law school to become a trial attorney, and that's what I was, and that's what I did. And even though I had all these other skills that I've discussed today, I didn't think of myself as anything basically but a trial attorney. Then a friend of mine said, he suggested that I start getting ready for retirement, literally getting the documents from the PERA and all that other stuff 3.5 years before I was going to retire. And I thought, man, that's a lot of time. And I asked other people about it, and they said, that's a lot of time. Well, I took his advice. And so by the time I was going to retire, my thinking had changed. I was thinking outside the box. I was thinking about, hey, I can step up my tennis. I can do more gardening. I wasn't stressed out about all those documents that the PERA requires because I had already done them or redone them or whatever the process was. And so I would say it helped me a lot to adjust my thinking in many ways, not just about I'm not going to be a trial attorney anymore. I'm going to be a different kind of attorney. But like Annette and Peter have said, what other skills do I have? What do I enjoy? I enjoy writing. I enjoy reading. I enjoy gardening. I enjoy time with family. So all those other things I've been able to enjoy now that I'm retired, and it didn't feel like a shock to, oh my gosh, I'm retired today. Now what do I do? It felt like a gradual enlightening process.
Peter, any comments before we move on?
Sure. I like that term enlightening because I think getting lighter is part of, what can happen as you move towards retirement. I interviewed a senior lawyer recently who said when he retired, he felt like a heavy yoke had been lifted from his shoulders that he didn't even know was there. And I agree about the change in thinking that for myself, I owned my own firm for many years. And it was a change, but a good change when I was willing to let that go. And so letting go is not always easy. But, selling off part of it to other lawyers in the firm was by the time I was ready to do that, I was glad to be doing it. And for a long time, same way in practice, I had to be the one who was, on top of everything. And, pivoting towards, people were doing this kind of stuff before I came along and they're going to do it after I am. So, I've done my part largely, and now I'm pivoting more towards supporting others in my firm and other things I'm involved with. But I don't have to be the one who's driving the bus. And I will say that so far I'm a failure at retirement, that I've talked about it, and my daughter and my wife, it's like, yeah, sure. We don't know that you'll ever let go, but if you don't want to, that's okay. And sometimes I say, well, I really want to. And then I think, well, but they asked me to do this, and I'd like to do that. So I've been fortunate to have the flexibility to kind of take a long glide path towards retirement.
Yeah. Well, and that's the best thing is when you have choices, right? One more topic I'd like to cover before we run out of time very briefly is the idea of specific programming to support the well-being of senior lawyers. We've discussed issues that relate to seniors specifically, and some of which also are relevant to younger lawyers. As part of the preparation for this podcast, members of the Senior Lawyers Division Board reached out to other states and their senior divisions. And we were very surprised to learn that not one state had well-being programming specifically targeting senior members. Do you think there's a need for that? And if so, what form could that take? Any ideas?
Yeah, I just subbed for the current chair of the Senior Lawyers Division for a pro bono meeting. And what that committee is thinking of doing is possibly paying for the bar dues for attorneys that agreed to take on maybe, like, say, a few pro bono cases during that year. We also talked about providing the Senior Lawyers Division, providing CLEs, not just for senior attorneys, but for all attorneys, young lawyers, any other attorneys that would want to attend, but they would be put on quarterly by the senior attorneys. So those are two ideas that we had recently.
Peter, any comments?
Sure. A couple more thoughts. One is, I think the new rule that the Supreme Court of New Mexico put in place about requiring lawyers to have succession plans is something that can be a beneficial activity. That I got involved in the Senior Lawyers Division because I thought, oh, I'll learn about how to transition from practice to retirement. And what I learned is that some of the senior lawyers have retired from government and some of the senior lawyers are still practicing. So that, that particular piece wasn't there. But I think that, the idea of possibly lunches or quarterly gatherings, could be helpful to talk about transitions, what people are experiencing. And one thought is in the pro bono area that I know for myself that, I see these volunteer to, advise over the phone or at the courthouse or whatnot, but in areas that I haven't practiced in for many years. And they say, well, we've got malpractice insurance to cover you and whatnot. But I think for some of us, I may not be the only one. It's like, well, I don't really just want to go in there and wing it in an area that I don't know. And, I don't want to give bad advice to people, but I think there's a huge need for people who can't afford lawyers to get legal advice. And I feel like there's a gap there that maybe if we could work on kind of a step-by-step kind of holding hands of senior lawyers, to get comfortable going into areas they haven't practiced in, that would be helpful.
Well, thank you. Good suggestions. And Jocelyn and Peter, I want to thank you for your time in participating in this podcast today, and thank the listeners for listening to Legal Wellbeing in Action.
Thank you for listening. This episode was produced by the State Bar of New Mexico's WellBeing Committee and the New Mexico Judges and Lawyers Assistance Program. All editing and sound mixing was done by Blue Sky eLearn. Intro music is by Gil Flores. The views of the presenters are that of their own and are not endorsed by the State Bar of New Mexico. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, or legal advice. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition.